I am so pleased to have this opportunity to moderate this panel. First, from Dynamite Comics, Editor-in-Chief, am I right, Joe?
Sure, bump me up.
All right, what the hell? Let's say that.
I think exactly. Now it's legally binding.
Indeed. I'm going to talk to Barucci about that. Joe Rybandt, everybody.
Hello.
And a man who's kicked ass in not only the kind of hooligan comic that we all love, superhero work, military comics as well, the co-creator of The Boys, Garth Ennis, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.
So I'm sure there are going to be fan questions, but just succinctly, I mean, because the third season did wrap up, and you know, again, based on your work, but truly, what is the experience like having it amplified because your work amplified because of the TV show?
Well, it's been great, as you can imagine. I mean, the Boys did well when it was a monthly comic, and it's done pretty damn well. You know, in collections since. I mean, I think we're now 10 years since the end of the original run. But the TV show has boosted it beyond anyone's imagination. You know, it's been everything we could have hoped for and more.
Yeah, you know, and I think we were very fortunate in the sense that the template had kind of been set by other work. You know, and Garth has benefited from, you know, the Preacher show was before the Boys. And,
Indeed.
you know, when things go to television or things go to movies, comic shops and just the market in general sees a real rise in interest in the material. And I think with Boys in particular, and I think with Preacher probably they found as well, is that the source material and the tone and all that is still there. So it's not like reading a very alien concept from people that have watched the show to people that pick up the trade. So
did Eric Kripke work on the Preacher TV show as well?
No, no, he didn't.
I know Seth and his partner, Seth Rogen and his partner.
They set it up the same way, but it was a different showrunner on Preacher.
Okay.
Preacher was a harder sell all around because it's such a difficult one to sum up in that one line that TV and film people love.
The elevator pitch, yeah.
Exactly. You know, it's a Western, but it's a horror story, and there's heaven and hell, and there's this guy, Cassidy, yeah, and Tulip has a gun, and whereas The Boys is simple.
Yeah.
Superheroes are bastards. They need a slap, and these are the boys who are going to do it.
Damn straight. It's absolutely.
And of course, what helps hugely, and I was saying this to someone yesterday, is that, of course, a mainstream audience, meaning a non-comics audience, has now been educated to the notion of the shared universe by Marvel and DC
Indeed.
movies. They get the idea that they all live in the same place, and that if you're walking down the street, you might see Spider-Man swing by, and then the Hulk will come crashing through a wall, and someone will show up to fight him. They're all in the same world. And I think, you know, the last 20 years of those films and TV shows has primed that mainstream audience for The Boys in a way that, you know, we couldn't even have hoped for.
Absolutely, man. Timing, but much like the comic as well. And if you will, because honestly, I'm so glad that Dynamite was more than happy to take over The Boys.
Well, we were one of many several companies that were interested.
Right.
You know,
and I have that, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, Garth, from your, I mean, truly, I mean, and I don't even if it's, you know, way in your rear view mirror and you don't think about it anymore. But if you don't mind, I mean, you know, yeah, when, you know, I do remember, unfortunately, the infamous hamster cover might have been the tipping point for DC and Vertigo to say.
I never found out what the tipping point was.
Okay.
I was never told there was this one moment, this one scene, one panel. I've guessed at it a few times. Honestly, I think what it was no one particular thing. It was just the idea that we were having a go at the product. Right. I mean, if you're DC and you're putting out superhero comics,
Justice League, sure.
And that leads to everything from movies to T-shirts to computer games to all the stuff. And all of a sudden, here's this comic that comes out that is actually having a pop at that.
Yeah.
And it is not hard to look at, say, the Seven and figure out who those characters represent.
100%.
You know who each of them is.
So you think you were just having a pop at them? You don't think it was a little deeper than that?
A little. Well, that's British slang for yes, considerably more energetic.
See, we all learned something today.
Indeed. Well, I want our British idioms. Absolutely, please.
Yeah. I mean, to have a pop is everything from starting a fight with to ridiculing to making gentle fun of. It sort of
covers the gamut.
It covers the whole thing. But that was essentially the problem. DC establishment, you know, the hierarchy looked at that and thought, no, this will not stand. You can do Preacher and you can have a go at, you know, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. But there's a far, from DC's point of view, there's a far more important Holy Trinity than that.
Yeah, don't F with Superman, basically.
And
It's okay to F
Superman,
with Jesus,
Batman,
but
and
that's
Wonder Woman,
yeah.
and you can't do that.
Outstanding. Oh, man. Well, then again, that's why I referred to it as a hooligan comic, and I mean it in the best way
Of course, yeah.
my over in this side of the ocean perspective of the soccer hooligan fandom and the like and everything.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's again, this is why those characters are so great, and truly, I mean, everyone from Billy Butcher to Huey, and everyone in between. I really it's so great, and again, you'll forgive me, but. What I like about the show is it is consistent with your ideas, but it's its own thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And both exist, and we can be surprised by both when you come back to them and when they do a new season. And it's like,
And
it's
the show, of
wonderful.
course, in that context, the show sells the book.
Yeah. Sure.
So the book stays current.
Indeed.
Which is lovely.
Yeah, I was looking at a trade. I had something, and I think it's from several years ago. It said 9th printing. It was like,
Sweet.
it's
Come on.
really it's mind-boggling in a lot of sense, because to get that type of length of publishing history in a library, and it's just perpetual seller. And obviously we always see uptick when a new season drops and when awareness just raises. But a lot of it is. I was going to ask if people can hear me, but I know that you can because I'm very loud. A lot of it is especially at shows, is people picking up for the first time. They're aware of the show, but what's the comic about? And the great thing, not to belabor, the great thing is that the tone is all there. As you said, the tone is all there.
Yeah.
And there might be slight shifts and there might be slight differences, but you still get the gist.
100%.
And overall, when this goes back to what we were talking about earlier, when you have an audience that now understands the notion of superheroes and their shared universe that we're used to in comics, but that a mainstream audience is now used to in film and TV, along with that consciousness comes that need for
Should I start
For the video.
along comes that need for something to be irreverent about it, some kind of satire, something to, and here's another British term that you're probably aware of, something to take the piss.
Yeah.
Indeed.
And that's what The Boys does. And some of you may remember a comic called Martial Law,
Indeed.
which is a book I love. And it was a book by Pat Mills and Kevin O'Neill that came out in the 80s. And it was about a guy, it was The Boys, but one step further, because it was about a guy who hunted superheroes. He hunted them down and killed them. There was no, surveillance for blackmail and only killing them as a last resort. It was just he killed them. And Pat Mills said that doing that for Epic, which was a branch of Marvel at the time, he said he ran into an interesting response, because when he met the Marvel editorial teams, he said that the rank and file, the majority of them, were perfectly capable of enjoying their regular Marvel books, but also a book that had a go, had a pop, that took the piss out of those books. Whereas it was the sort of hierarchy that was like, oh, well, wait a minute, we're not sure about this. But there is, I think, if you love anything enough, superhero comics in this instance, you're not going to mind something that has a go at them. You're not going to mind something that makes fun of them, because maybe a lot of it ties into thoughts you've had about those books and those characters yourself. And if you love it enough, you're not going to mind too much if someone's having a bit of fun, having a go at it. That's the function The Boys fulfills.
So before John continues, I have two things. One, taking the piss and taking the pop, which is
More severe?
Taking the piss is specifically satirical.
Okay.
You're making fun of something.
Yes.
Right?
I'm
Having
on
a pop at something could go all the way up to actually starting a fight.
Okay.
You got to hear more Ricky Gervais podcasts. That's why I skipped to the
Well, you have to anyway, because he's hilarious.
100%, but I so hear you.
And then the other thing I just wanted to say is, just in going with what Garth was saying about timing and what you were saying about timing, is I think that the audience was primed with 20 years of superheroes.
Absolutely.
That while there were a lot of early development talks about the boys, and
Yeah.
there was feature film talks, and it was all in that kind of that early
Nebulous.
heady superhero days where everybody wanted to make superheroes. I don't know that it would have that the media portion of the boys would have hit as well because it would have gotten a little bit.
Yeah,
drained out.
I read a couple of treatments, and I read a screenplay that was written for a boys' movie maybe about 10 years ago, and it just didn't work. But you could almost feel the writer sort of losing confidence in the material halfway through because he was going away from the sort of the basic idea of traditional superhero comics with something having a go at them, and just moving away from superheroes altogether. And eventually he did things. There was a bizarre sequence set in the Farallon Islands off the coast of San Francisco. I happen to know, because I've been there, that the Farallon Islands are the Pacific Coast #1 breeding site for the great white shark.
Okay.
There was a sequence in the film set there, and no one got eaten by a shark. Now that's a problem. So
Missed opportunity.
Missed opportunity. And you had this weird sense, as I say, of the guy kind of losing confidence in the material and kind of reaching out in all directions for things he could put in there, and then not even using those frankly irrelevant things properly.
Sure.
Fast forward 10 years, and we have a world that is absolutely ready for the boys' TV show and ready for the concept.
Yeah.
Indeed. Absolutely, man. No, and again, it definitely the right timing. Listen, Joe and I can pepper Garth with a ton of questions. I hope you have them. If you don't mind, for the purposes of the video that's also being shot, if you don't mind going up to the microphone, which is right there, and if you have questions, because...
Don't be shy. The first person would. There we go.
There you go.
go.
Fantastic.
Oh,
Here they
that's
come.
a good break. Yeah,
And I like how I was ready with the
end.
question, but they're sprinting to the microphone. Gentleman in the striped shirt, please.
How you doing? I got
Hey.
2 quick questions. First off, I really loved your episode of The Boys Diabolical. Really great seeing kind of that more comic accurate look in that vibe. And how
Does everyone know what he's talking about? The anime,
Yes.
animated special that they did in The Boys?
I just want to ask
Sorry.
how that came to be. What was it like writing that in animated form?
Writing it was like writing anything else. It's always a pleasure to write Butcher, for instance, because he's my favorite character out of all the ones I've come up with over the years. Seeing the results was absolutely fascinating. You know, seeing an animated show take shape from sketches to sort of very brief animated kind of tryouts to the voices coming in to the music being added and the soundtrack. Yeah, it was absolutely fascinating. It was great. I'd love to have another go at it.
Great, we'd love to see it. And then real quick, as a huge fan of Rover Red Charlie, it was great seeing Michael do a little one-pager in Most Important
Oh,
Comic
right,
on
yeah,
Earth.
yeah.
So what was it like going back to that world? Do you want to come back at some point in the future?
I don't know about doing anything else myself, although, you know, that is one of my favorites. I loved writing that story. There has been, as there always is with pretty much everything, a steady level of Hollywood interest in that as well. You know, as I'm sure this won't come as a surprise, as an animated show. So if that did ever happen, that might be something nice to get involved in. But that is one of my favorites.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Good question.
Hi, my name's Octavius, and I would like to ask 2 quick questions. One of them is, who is your favorite character out of the Boys cast do you think performs the character the best, comically accurate, or just your favorite character?
I hate to single anyone out, but it looks to me like Anthony Starr is having the most fun.
Amazing. Amazing Homelander, yeah.
He really does.
And the second quick one is, out of the Boys comic or TV show, what character do you relate to the most and why?
Careful, think about it.
Relate to, oh God, yes. And then they arrested him.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, every character any writer creates has a little bit of them in them, you know, your negative thoughts, your positive thoughts. So that's a hard one to answer. I don't know that there's any one character that I would really single out. Sorry, not very helpful, but yeah.
There's elements, I think, of your personal lives over the years in the relationship between Huey and Butcher and Butcher and his wife, and just in things and Huey and Annie,
Only to the extent that, you put a little bit of,
Right.
as I say, of yourself into any situation,
Awesome.
Thank you.
All right.
I wanted to ask a little bit about an update on your World War II books, and if you're looking
Yes, I'm
at
so glad
maybe,
you're asking about the military books.
Korean, if you're going to maybe extend to maybe another era in history in terms of military or military history, but I wanted to get an input on what you're doing next on World War II.
I tend to stick to World War II just because for me, it is the point of maximum interest. I've written about Vietnam, and in fact, there's a Punisher book at the end of the year.
Oh, great.
Where Frank and Nick Fury find themselves back in Vietnam. So that's one that'll always be interesting to me. I'm interested in the First World War. The thing there is that I grew up reading a strip called Charlie's War, which is available in reprint, and I encourage you to read it because it is the best comic strip I think I've ever read. And that, anytime I think about the First World War and think about a story set there, I find myself thinking, but I can't do better than Charlie's War, so why bother? I think it's probably going to continue to be the Second World War. I have, as for what I'm working on, The Lion and the Eagle just came out from Aftershock.
Yep.
Beautiful, beautiful book.
Indeed.
Nice looking book,
Gorgeous.
yeah. And in September, there will be a book I'm particularly keen on, actually, and it's called Battle Action, and it's a revival by me of the comic I read when I was a kid, which hasn't really been seen since the mid-'80s. But I got together with the publisher.
Rebellion, right?
Rebellion, that's right. And I wrote 7 stories. So it's an anthology, and I got 7 of the best artists I could. We've got Chris Burnham in there, Kevin O'Neill, John Higgins, among others. And that was particularly interesting for me because I chose 7 characters. And it's not all war comics. There's some World War II stories, but there's also like an 80s crime story, and there's a sort of future dystopia story. I've taken my favorites from that original comic. And it was interesting for me because what I had to do was I had to kind of alter my writing style for each one. That doesn't mean I'm writing them like the old strips, but I'm trying to write something appropriate to the feel that each of the old strips gives you when you read them. So that'll be out in September. It's already doing quite well in the UK, and I think we're going to do more. But it was a particular pleasure to do that.
Are you going to be working with Steve Epting again?
Yes.
Hey, great.
That's the other thing. TKO are going to be doing a book called Partisan, which it's not a sequel to Sarah, but it's the same world. It's the Russian front in World War II, and it follows a woman who ends up joining the resistance, the Russian partisans who fought the Germans behind the lines. And Steve's about halfway through that, and he's doing amazing work. It's great looking stuff. So yes, there will be more of that too. Eventually, all being well, there'll be a trilogy. The third one will be set during the Battle of Berlin, and it'll follow 2 characters. It'll follow a German housewife and a Russian woman tank commander as they fight out this, well, the housewife doesn't, but she's there. But as the great cataclysmic conflict of World War II reaches its final battle.
Yeah, and if people here have only checked out Preacher or checked out Punisher or checked out The Boys and haven't checked out Garth's war stuff, you really are missing out. There's
Battlefields.
Yeah, and there's Sarah, I think Sarah is
TKO of Sarah
Tankies through Dead. I mean, you just
Right,
replayed
that's
it through
right,
Red
yep.
Ted
That's
Reckoning and
right,
everything.
That's right, and they did the string
Right.
bags as well. Aftershock of Out of the Blue and Dreaming
Absolutely,
Eagles and
yes.
The Lion
But
and the Eagle.
if you like his writing, in the Boys and Preacher and stuff, the writing is still there. It's
Oh, yeah.
and the settings it's all real.
Yes.
So
It's also, frankly, my favorite
Yes.
stuff to write. It's where I go all out and give it everything I have.
And you find these amazing personal stories of World War II, and they are so visceral. Hell, man, 20 years ago when you were doing war stories for Vertigo, it's like, you've always had my attention, but it's like, oh my God, this is great. And that's why it's been such a lovely experience being able to talk to you about the war books as
Right.
much as the other stuff.
Well, that's one of the things about this Battle Action book is that That, when I was a kid, when I was 8 years old and first discovered this stuff, that is what sparked my interest in military history. And I think it is why that's my favorite genre to write in, because I'm aware that these are stories that if you will, even if you allow for the hyperbole of war comics of the era,
Sure.
because they're always that bit larger than life, they wouldn't go as far, say, as Sergeant Rock, but they're in that ballpark. But allowing for that hyperbole, you were reading stories that are based on things that men and women actually did. And to me, that's always 10 times more interesting than fantasy. It's why I like war and crime, and even to an extent horror. If you just sort of leave aside the supernatural stuff, if you think about a good Hellblazer story, it maybe won't have that much supernatural stuff in it. It's very down to earth. And I prefer those genres over outright fantasy like superheroes and science fiction and sword and sorcery. They have their place, but for me, it's the more real life stuff, I think, that grabs me.
And that's why at least once a month or every time Kelly's Heroes comes up, which I think it did.
Oh, what a movie.
Kelly's Heroes?
Oh, what a
Yeah.
movie. I love that movie. Joe, and forgive me, slight business question. No,
Sure.
I want to ask, because Garth has this great relationship with Dynamite, but does do work with other publishers, is there any sort of, like, Garth, do you pitch to whomever? Is there a right of or first refusal from
No,
Dynamite?
no.
Not particularly,
yep,
no. It's just, whoever I'm working with at any given time, when they come to me and say, we'd love for you to do something like when
Great.
TKO did that,
Yeah.
my first thought was, well, I do have this idea about a Russian woman sniper, and I'd love to find a home for that. And they actually suggested Steve Epting,
That's so great.
which was a marriage made in heaven. But it's really just a question of who I'm talking to at any given time.
Well, again, this is why this era is so great, because it was rare in American comics to get these stories, and now they're so
Or
open
get
and
real,
shut.
non Sergeant Rocky or
Yeah.
Sergeant
I mean, you
Fury,
think of, there was
which are great too. I mean,
Hey,
There
and
was
the
stuff
Nam.
like Blazing Combat.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
the early issues of the Nam.
Yeah.
When there is no fantasy element to
Yep.
it.
I'm hip.
And they're just doing sort of real life war
and
stories.
trailblazing in that sense too.
Yeah.
Did.
For both. I mean, Kurtzman obviously a trailblazer, but
Yeah.
even Marvel taking that leap with the Nom.
Yeah, which
100%.
was, at the height of superhero publishing in the 80s, for them to do a book that's just called The Nam.
Right.
And is about nothing more than...
They did throw the Punisher in there at some point towards
Right, but that's
the
why I'm
tail
saying,
end.
the early issues
Right.
before they
Right, yes.
frankly ruined it.
Yeah.
I think the first 2 years where you're talking about just a platoon of GIs in
Right.
Vietnam,
Right.
wondering what the hell it is they're doing and why they're
Yeah.
there and so on, like a very, very brave move to make.
What I love about The Boys, and I was wondering if you talk a little bit about, is the darkness. And like Grant Morrison reminds me of you in that you guys bring the darkness of the real world to comics. Is that a UK thing or?
I think it is.
I mean, it looks
so,
like
too.
the history of America, The Boys.
I think it was definitely a UK thing at one point. I mean, when DC in particular came over to the UK in the 80s and started kind of grabbing all the really good UK writers and artists because, frankly, they could treat them better and pay them better. What you had there was American comics suddenly infused with that UK sensibility. Most obviously by Alan Moore. I mean, one thinks of Swamp Thing and Watchmen and so on, and the work he was doing. And yeah, at the time, I think UK writers and artists, writers in particular, had a much grittier, almost nastier way of looking at the world. And I came in at the kind of tail end of that. There was Alan, and then you had Neil Gaiman and Grant and Pete Milligan and Jamie Delano, and then a couple more years go by and there's me and Mark Miller and Warren Ellis. And at that point, I feel in the early 90s, American writers start to learn the lesson. And I feel that when you look at people like Brian Azzarello, for instance, they start to bring, they're American writers who start to bring a darker sensibility to their work. To the point that nowadays, I think when an interesting new writer comes along, they're as likely to be American as British. I personally feel that probably the best writer to get into the business in the last quarter century is Brian Vaughan. And he's obviously American. because Brian and I are friends. I know him well, and I know the stuff that he loves and the stuff he grew up on because he learned those lessons from those British writers.
I mean, it's deep. I even started to see the darkness in myself, and that, you know, we all
I'm happy to
ignore
have
it,
helped you get in touch with that.
We ignore it, you know, but the guy who's the head hero, you know, reminds me of the America.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if that was intentional.
Well,
No, it was intentional.
Hi. First of all, I'd like to thank you for the emotional gut punch that I experienced when I read a lot of your work, like your Punisher Max series, Soviet, Dear Becky, The Unknown Soldier.
Yeah.
My question is, were you surprised that the Preacher TV show took it as far as your series did, and in some ways even further in terms of the religious third rail? That's actually what surprised me about that TV show, was that they went to places that I didn't think that an American TV show, FX, took it to.
It might have been because if I go back to what I said earlier about how don't mess with the product, but you know, you can have a go at religion if you want. With the Preacher comic, what we always found that anyone who didn't like it left it alone. We didn't get that many complaints on Preacher because people would pick it up and either love it or hate it, and if they hated it, we never heard from them. And it might be that the TV show was the same to an extent. Anyone who would have been really offended by that might not have known it existed. Yeah. And that could well be, just as that's how we got away with it on the comic, that might be how the show got away with it too. You know, I never saw any reactions to the show that suggested that Middle America, the Midwest, famously religious and so on, had reacted violently against it. The impression I had was that they didn't even know it existed.
Wow.
And that might well have been how we got away with that one.
Hi. I'm sorry if my voice is shaking. I'm both starstruck and freezing.
It is cold.
It is cold in here, absolutely.
First, I just wanted to thank you for a few things. When I first started dating my guy, he gave me a copy of Preacher to read. And I think it was a bit of a test to see how compatible we were. 23 years later, here we are, happily married. So,
bravo.
That's great.
Cheers.
Excellent.
so thank you for that and for all your brilliant stories, which we're continuing to devour. And my question's this: since you mentioned great white sharks a little while ago, do you have any vision or ambition to bring Gaia to the big screen or the small screen, and why or why not?
Gaia. You mean the sort of concept?
Goddess. I'm sorry, goddess.
Oh, right.
Goddess.
No, I don't. I don't have any particular plans. However, I do want to write about sharks. so I expect they'll be showing up at some point.
Jaws 3 is his favorite of all the Jaws
No,
movies.
it's not.
Yeah, I was going to say, Jesus. Jaws 3D.
Jaws 2.
Oh, God.
Oh, no, that's right. It's 4. It's 4.
Yeah, I was going to say, the one with bloody Michael Caine. That's right, exactly, number 4.
A filthy slur. I will say this. I was at one point lucky enough to go cage diving and be in the cage with the shark being outside the cage. And actually see great whites close up, and I can tell you it is every bit as wonderful as you've ever imagined it might be. It was fantastic.
Wow.
And
We'll
terrifying.
look forward to that.
It's not terrifying.
Well, no, I mean,
it's
for me,
being
terrifying.
It's like being at the zoo in reverse. You know,
Because you're in the cage.
yeah, you're in the cage. It's not like you're going to step out of the cage anymore. That you're going to go to the zoo and like leap into the lion's enclosure for a close-up look.
Thank you.
We thank you for coming to Terrificon instead of watching Shark Week, because I think we're in the midst of Shark Week.
Oh, am I missing Shark Week?
I'm sorry,
again?
man. I don't mean to bum you out, yeah.
We got to go.
So,
Hey there, Garth.
Hey.
Mark Cicero from New Haven, Connecticut. Thank you for being here. I think it's probably time to talk about Herogasm.
All right.
Both your original depiction of Herogasm and what we saw on the screen fairly recently. You know, I've liked the television show a whole lot. I've liked comics a whole lot longer, and your comics particularly. And I think that episode, I'm curious what you thought of it, but I was a bit disappointed because the source material has a big lie to everybody. Oh, there's a extraterrestrial threat that we're going to all go, and all of the A-listers go, and then they just have a depraved, debaucherous good time versus essentially a sexy house party. So, yeah, I feel like this is one of the few times where the show has maybe taken a step back, or, I mean, there's plenty of depravity. We see love sausage on the screen. But my question really boils down to what were your thoughts about the show? Were you, that particular episode, were you pleased with it?
I'm going to answer briefly for you. Sorry.
Right. I suppose I don't want you to get into a situation where the studio is upset. But I guess maybe a safer question to ask is when we think about the television or movie depictions of comics, with all the technology that goes into them, are there still limitations and stories that can only be told with comics?
If there are limitations, I think they're probably a matter of budget. Herogasm, the comic, is set on a tropical island, and it's quite a long, involved storyline because while all the super depravity is going on, of course, the boys are kidnapping a member of the president's security detail and finding out what he knows about what happened on 9/11. So all the sort of super orgies are really just a smokescreen for the boys' actual agenda. To do that would have probably taken 2 or 3 episodes of the show, and also to depict that, you would have had to have spent an awful lot of money. This is something where I think the show couldn't really give up, what would that have been, about a third of its season to one storyline in that regard. So I think that's probably what they ran up against there. It would be a question of either setting the first half of that season only on Herogasm, or just getting it across the idea that there is this sort of annual super orgy that has a certain reputation to it.
And I just want to say, because we talked about this briefly, I think the fact that we got a TV episode of The Boys called Herogasm.
That's true.
Really is the be-all and end-all, no matter what they did with it.
Ultimately,
and also that love sausage.
You have to think about capturing the spirit.
Yeah,
that's what's important, because when the TV show, and remember, they have budgetary constraints.
Yeah.
In comics, we don't.
Yeah,
we can do anything we want.
Fatigue constraints.
So long as the artist can draw it, we can do anything we want.
Yeah.
They can't. They're up against all sorts of things. So they have to think about capturing the spirit. And to me, that guy getting sucked off by an octopus, that more than captures the spirit. Boy, they are putting that fella through the ringer. They really,
absolutely
really are. Like, what are they going to do to the deep next? Is what I'm wondering. And what that actor must have thought when he signed on for that role. It's like, oh, I'm a superhero and I'm basically Aquaman. Okay, I guess I swim a bit. No.
Also, don't you want to be surprised? Because I literally was just saying this before, that there's the comic and there's the TV show, and just like The Walking Dead, as much as we would appreciate a literal adaptation of Boys or Walking Dead, it's great that we could be surprised by both.
There's always going to be change.
There's also
that's good, though.
There's also that notion too, that as I said earlier, the show sells the book.
Yeah.
They're the experts about what works in TV. Eric Kripke's last show went 12 seasons or something.
Yeah, Supernatural, yeah.
That's what we want.
Yeah.
We don't want something that dies on the vine in 2 or 3 seasons. That ultimately is of little use. They're the experts, and they know they know all the considerations that will allow that show to last and become something legendary.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Hi. So going back to the conversation about the war comics, has there ever been like an event, battalion, or memoirs from World War I that you looked at and thought, I want to write a comic about that?
I do go back to my point about Charlie's War and how that forms a sort of a roadblock for me. If there's one aspect of World War I that I might explore further, it might be the aviation side of things. I am interested in that period as the birth of aerial combat, where these aircraft that were really, put together from canvas and wood and string, and were really only intended as reconnaissance machines, to answer that age-old question, what's on the other side of the hill?
Sure.
I'm the general, I need to know what's over there. I've never been able to find out before, but this weird little machine will allow me to. And then, before anyone's ready for it, they start fighting each other. And that leads to, the situation we have today. We're incredibly sophisticated things like F-35s, which could probably shoot down 3 squadrons of World War I planes and make you a cup of coffee, all without leaving the ground. These enormously complex machines. So I think it would be interesting to explore that at some point. I did a book with Howard Chaykin about 10 years ago called The Phantom Eagle, which is the old Marvel character. And he was a World War I aviator. That was something I enjoyed. But beyond that,
Did you do an Enemy Ace for DC?
But that was World War II. That was him updated to World War II.
Oh, that's right.
Okay,
Because he was
wow.
originally a World War
Yes.
I.
Right. Yes.
He was.
You and Russ Heath, right? For Enemy Ace?
It was Russ Heath on book 2. Christian Alamy did the first book.
Oh, of course. Good friend.
But he couldn't finish, so Russ Heath did the second one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, man.
So yes, it's something I always think about. I mean, that World War I is basically where I become genuinely fascinated by military history. Anything prior to that, I find myself I'm still interested, but I'm slightly put off by the level of technology or lack of it that you come up against, because, even as late as the American Civil War, it's still huge bodies of men crashing into each other. And I read about those battles, and yes, they're important, and yes, they define modern America, and yes, they solved the big problem, or went some way towards solving it. But I keep thinking, could you hurry up and invent the tank? Could you invent the aeroplane? Because this is dragging a bit. I mean, that's a terrible thing to say, but it is what puts me off really exploring those battles and those conflicts to the extent that I do in World War II, when things are coming together and in a really interesting way, and you have a kind of a mobile warfare that, it sucks in the whole world, but because it moves so fast, it's over in 6 years. It's absolutely cataclysmic, but it's fascinating.
Thank you.
I want to build on that question and ask you about one of your war stories. And I might be getting the nickname of the plane wrong, but it was a British plane that didn't work well. Was it a Jenny? And it may not be a Jenny. I might be misremembering.
There was a story I did called J for Jenny, but that was the airplane. That was just the name they painted on the.
Oh, okay, but that is
the plane.
it was a type of. Am I wrong? It wasn't a type of plane that should have worked better, but really wasn't kind of a great plane.
Was there a shitty plane in World War II?
Yeah, that you wrote about essentially. No, am I misremembering? I might be.
I mean, let me think. J for Jenny was about the crew of a Lancaster bomber, which is one of the most successful aircraft, military aircraft of all time. The string bags was about an aircraft that seemed like an anachronism, but was incredibly successful and sank enemy battleships and so on. Real Star Wars stuff, like one little plane chugging along and launching its torpedo and blowing up the giant enemy ship. So I'm not quite sure what that would be.
I easily could be misremembering, and the J for Jenny title sounds familiar.
Yeah, J for Jenny's the one I did with David Lloyd.
It is that. All right,
yeah. But it's not about
the
problem with the aircraft. It's actually the crew that's dysfunctional.
Okay. God, and truly, man, you got and you continue to do this. You got so many amazing artists to draw these war books.
Yeah.
And I always give it up to David for his collaboration.
Well, you do find, or I've certainly always found that once people realize you want to do this stuff, you get a lot of artists saying, "Oh, I've never drawn that. I'd love a crack at that." And getting.
I'm glad you got Burnham coming up for your battle stuff. That's fantastic.
He did a wonderful job. Actually, that was he working with him was a little bit like Steve Epting, because I'd never worked with them before, and they'd been someone else's suggestion, And whenever you have not worked with someone, you're thinking like, what's this going to be like? Is he going to get it? And in both cases, it was like they were looking in my head. But a lot of artists do want to draw that stuff, and when you give them an opportunity to do things they've never done before, they will leap on board.
You were going to say something about David, and forgive me, I apologize.
Oh, well, Dave Lloyd, Dave Gibbons, Cam Kennedy, Carlos Esquerra. I did a story with Carlos called Condors, and that was about the Spanish Civil War. Carlos, of course, is from Spain.
Sure.
And he told me that he'd never had an opportunity to write, to illustrate a story set in his own country, never mind a story about his nation's kind of defining conflict of the 20th century. So that was a treat for him. So yeah, they'll all come on board if you put the word out.
Understood. Yeah. Absolutely. I'm sorry, John Constantine, please. Hellblazer, everybody.
You've told a lot of outrageous stories over the years. You've definitely pushed some envelopes. Is there anything that you've gotten published that you're like, you even felt went too far with, and you're even like, how the fuck did the publisher let me get away with this?
Probably, but I think I got over that fairly early on. You see, getting into comics in the late 80s, early 90s, as I did, there was a sense that you could now do anything because the trail had been blazed by people like Alan Moore. You really felt like, okay, we've grown up now. We're the same as any other storytelling medium, film, TV, novels, plays. There's nothing we can't do. And so I may have been writing stuff that pushed or expanded the envelope without even having thought. So when I put Preacher together, yes, there was a certain amount of cackling glee as an issue would come out and it would have something in it that you just thought was absolutely ridiculous. But at the same time, at no point did I really think, my God, this is beyond belief, and I have personally kicked doors down and smashed boundaries. You just thought, this is where the story's supposed to go, so that's where I'm going to send it. I know that there are people who, perhaps a little bit earlier, who did find themselves in that situation. Kevin O'Neill, who drew Martial Law that I was talking about, and who has actually drawn a strip for me for the Battle Action book. In the 80s, his entire drawing style was banned by the Comics Code Authority. He drew a Green Lantern story that Alan Moore had written, and it was sent in because everything had to be sent to the code in those days. And they came back and said, no, we will not approve this, and don't send us any more art by this artist because his entire style is too disturbing for us to. And first of all, DC just said, right, fuck it, and they ran the book without the stamp on it, and it was probably one of those things that actually helped the fall of the Comics Code Authority, which is a good thing.
Indeed.
And Kevin himself was delighted. Like he thought it was funny as hell. Like they don't even like my style. Like my whole style is unacceptable. I should say that the one time I talked to someone who'd had actual dealings with the code, where he was talking to someone on the phone instead of just getting a letter back, was Archie Goodwin, famous editor at Marvel and DC. And he said that he was convinced that the guy he was talking to on the other end of the phone was drunk. So that tells you something about our moral guardians of the 1980s. But it was more for that generation, I think, to kick the door down. It was for people like myself and Mark Miller and Warren Ellis to sort of make the most of the opportunities they'd given us.
Thank you.
Great stories, man. This is killing me.
Hi. I wanted to ask, out of the most popular comic series that you made, which is your favorite?
My favorite is probably Sarah, the story about the Russian woman sniper. There are other war stories like Dear Billy that appeared in Battlefields. There was The Last German Winter and Nightingale that both appeared in the War Stories series. Very fond of the string bags. I love writing that battle action stuff. My favorite character is probably Butcher from The Boys. That doesn't mean The Boys is my favorite, but I love that character. I love his wife. They're probably my first and second favorites. Beyond that, you know, I love big chunks of Preacher, big chunks of The Boys, and Hitman, moments I've written here and there. But if I had to narrow it down to one story, it would be Sarah. That worked out so well. That was a dream.
Thank you.
Will you and John McCrae come back to Hitman?
I don't know about Hitman because, you know, the character did rather a final ending.
Oh, that's true. Well, it'd be
But I will, someone asked me this today, and, you know, I will drop into Noonan's bar from time to time.
Excellent.
And tell stories about Baytor, and Six Pack, and Hacking, and the Section 8 guys, what's left of them.
That's excellent, man.
Yeah.
I was just about to ask about Hitman, so that's fine.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, that's good. You did
Damn.
fine. No worries. You're good. You're good. It's two questions, so you kind of answered one of them. So the first question was going to be about Hitman, that at one point they were talking about doing a show for it.
Right.
Which personally, this is the time to do it. I mean, you have a Hitman in Gotham who every time he sees Batman, he calls him Darth Vader. He's in a bar which is full of lowlifes and demons and just weird shit, and it's Gotham, so it's fine. Do you think we'd ever see that maybe one day? I mean, I know the character did have, as you put it, a very fine ending, but
There's a very final ending.
final.
I could not judge whether or not that was a fine ending. It was definitely a final ending, but yeah.
And then the second question I had was about The Boys. I mean,
Well, let's do Hitman first.
Yes.
Okay. Yes, there has been interest in a Hitman show. Yes, it went a certain distance down the road, but it didn't get very far. And my guess is there is one problem: guns. The guy has guns, and you know, in any given issue of Hitman, there is probably a pretty cataclysmic gunfight, and lots of people are shot to death, and that is something that Hollywood is a bit nervous about at the minute for obvious reasons. And I think Hitman would probably founder on the same rocks. You probably remember the Punisher show from a few years ago. I thought John Bernthal was great, and I was quite impressed by the first season. But one thing I did notice was they tended to go to ridiculous lengths to get him into fistfights rather than gunfights. They couldn't completely ignore the fact that he was a guy who carried guns and used them, but the number of times he would get into a fist fight and have people hitting him with baseball bats and iron bars and things that Frank just wouldn't allow to happen to himself, that no one intelligent who had access to a firearm would allow to happen to themselves, just seemed to me to be indicative of that problem that Hollywood currently has. And I think, as I say, Hitman would have exactly the same problem. And your Boys question?
Was there any scene that you thought up that you wanted to write down for The Boys that even you were like, I can't? Like, it would be great, but I can't. It's just, you know.
Because of the extremity of the situation?
Yeah, because considering The Boys.
Anytime I've had that feeling like maybe I shouldn't do this, I've just thought, fuck it, and gone ahead anyway. But I can tell you, there was a scene I was going to go back to Hitman. If you think about Hacking, the sort of gang moron who later somehow becomes intelligent, he was going to die because he was going to get hold of a lightsaber or, you know, a laser sword of some kind, and he would be fucking about with it. What's that? Oh, it's a flashlight. Switch it on. And that's how he was going to die. And then I thought, no, I kind of need to keep hacking around because someone has to survive this.
Right.
But that's what would have happened to him.
Okay. Thank you.
Outstanding.
I wanted to meet you because I really love the comic Hitman. So that I got, of all your work, that's the one I personally enjoy.
A lot of people love Hitman.
And I came up here because it was interesting to see all the things about Hitman that I liked. You seem to be talking about with all these other works. So I was just thinking with the shark, where you have the zombie shark in the aquarium, and how you know, Tommy would always make fun of the characters like Green Lantern or so, and then the war stories, right, where you would have those the stories in Hitman where he goes in, where he shows his experiences in the first Iraq War. So I just found it fascinating that all the things that you seen that people know you about were part of Hitman.
It was very much a case of sort of filling it full of things that fascinate me. I mean, what makes Hitman the odd one is that it's set in the DC universe. And so occasionally those characters will pop up. Batman will appear, Green Lantern will appear, Catwoman,
Superman.
Etrigan the Demon, Superman. And that was good fun because there was a sort of understanding that if they wander into Hitman territory, they're going to suffer. And most of them do, you know, like some degree of ridicule. But I think perhaps that because it was this odd corner of the DC universe, that might have been partly responsible for Hitman never really doing as well as other books. It's one that I'm enormously fond of. It has a special place in my heart, but it never did anywhere near as well as Preacher or The Punisher, for instance. It was just one that I loved and I wanted to keep going, and I do enjoy returning to the world of. But yes, it was very much a place for me to put all those funny little quirky things. You know, time to do a dinosaur storyline. Let's get that in there because we've got to have Tommy and Nat fight dinosaurs. For instance, it's ridiculous. The other thing about it, actually, as part of the DCU was, I don't know if you remember, but at the time, Batman, the Batman world was going through a sort of series of giant crossover events. And, you know, there was an earthquake and there was a plague and the sun went out, although that might have been one of those sort of overall...
No Man's Land after that.
Right.
Yeah.
And because, you know, Hitman's a DC book, I have to take part in these things.
Oh, geez.
1 million.
Oh, sure. Oh, my God. How'd you do that in Hitman?
I wasn't going to, actually,
Okay.
because I always found that there was a way you could find a way into these things to involve Hitman in these crossovers. And I thought most of them were terrible, to be honest with you, because like I say, there's a plague, there's an earthquake, and Gotham City will never be the same again. It'll be exactly the same again, and Batman wearing a slightly darker shade of Batsuit is not, you know, a massive change for the character or the world. It was doing those that sort of drove me on creatively. I think, you ask about Hitman 1 million, that was the one I wasn't going to do because I read Grant Morrison and Mark Miller's outline and I thought it was a lot of balls. I mean, those two you're talking about two brilliant writers.
Indeed.
But I think on that one they got a little bit carried away with their own enthusiasm and thought that everyone else would think this was a brilliant idea anyway. And I wasn't going to do it. And I was just going to let someone else write that issue. And then the editor, Dan Raspler, still a good friend, said to me, man, I know you hate this stuff, but think about it. I think you can do it. On a plane flying from Texas to New York, I actually thought up that idea where Tommy just ends up in the 5 billionth century AD or whatever it is and runs into those idiots. And you have all that. The whole thing is just a big parody on our hero is shot to the future stories, and it worked out great.
That's hilarious.
Like I say, sometimes being made to do something that you don't really want to be a part of will drive you on and give you certain creative opportunities that you weren't expecting.
Yes, when you mentioned it, I just was thinking with Batman, where they had all those comics where, you know, they had Gotham City was cut off from the rest of the United States, and I loved it in the Hitman comics, in that all the people in the bar, they didn't even realize that Gotham City had been cut off. You know, they were in the bar
whatever the
all time, so
danger
there's no
is,
difference.
it's not going to set foot in Noonan's bar because it'll get machine gunned. Yeah.
So thank you very much.
All right.
I got to dig up that issue, man.
Hi, I should have a question about Soldier Boy. So in the comic books, every time when he's fighting, we see him say the names of different states in the country. In Herogasm, when he's fighting Butcher, he said Arkansas, Nebraska, Maine. In the show, he never did that. Would you change that? Would you add that to the show?
No, I don't think it's necessary. I mean, it goes back to what we've been talking about, how, you know, the show is the show, and they're the experts in that regard, so they should do what they need to do to make the show work. The reason he did it in the comic was, I said earlier that, you know, all the characters in The Boys, the superhero characters in The Boys, are recognizable as who inspired them. And Soldier Boy is, oh my God, shock horror, Captain America.
Yeah.
And I just thought that first of all, the guy should be a complete straight, like a boring bastard. And the only interesting thing he could come up with to do was, while he was fighting, to shout out the names of states, because he's Captain America. And it's like, that's the best you can do, really? That's your shtick? Because I think there's something sort of goofy about that character to begin with. So that's where that comes from. It really doesn't go any deeper than that.
Well, yeah, I was just thinking because like there's a lot of like crazy and goofy stuff in the TV show, so I was just like confused on like why they skip that because I
They might have thought that
really liked.
they might have thought that if he's yelling out state names, nobody's going to know necessarily what it means in the context of that scene.
And also, he's a considerably sleazier character in the show.
He's not rah-rah. He's not rah-rah America.
Right.
He's sort of the Homelander, but 30 years earlier.
Yeah.
He's like a prototype for the Homelander. In the comic, they're two separate characters. The Homelander is fairly obviously Superman, and he's Captain America, and there the twain shall meet, except when Soldier Boy is blowing the Homelander to try to get into the Seven, not realizing that the Homelander will never let him into the Seven.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah, and he's just going to continue.
Also, age-appropriate alert.
Indeed.
I think. You
Yeah, no, I did a quick look. I heard a baby earlier.
There was a baby earlier, but they left.
Wasn't sure if I was like hearing the world's youngest boys fan, or
I imagine what you saw was someone just grabbing their kid and running like
exactly for real. Yeah, they were on that side of the room. That's hilarious.
I mean, if you're at this panel, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but no, you're talking about a situation where the characters are just so different to begin with that it really doesn't matter.
Okay, thank you.
Well, to wrap up, I want to say, honestly, Garth, and I'm so glad someone else brought it up and you brought it up, that your generation and the previous generation of British writers came in, saw our, and I'm sure you were like this too. I love the story that American comics would come over to England as ballast in ships. And they would wind up in secondhand stores, and that's where you guys all kind of picked them up.
There was one artist called Jim Bakey who lived on the Orkney Islands to the north of Scotland. And he actually, you talk about the comics being used as ballast on the ships, he would find them washed up on the beach. That's how he encountered American comics for the first time. He would take them home, dry them out. But yes, you have a generation of people like Alan Moore and Alan Grant, who we sadly just lost, who grew up in American comics and loved them, but have just a slightly different way of looking at them. I mean, if you consider 100%. Alan Moore, he wrote some incredibly reverential Superman stories.
Oh, absolutely.
He loved that stuff. But when he considered the idea of the superhero overall, instead of reverential Superman two-parters, you get Watchmen and you get Miracle Man, because a writer like Alan, of course, is going to think about the big picture. He's going to think about what would it be like if these people actually existed. And of course, and this ties into The Boys, if these people actually existed, it would be horrific. It would be absolutely awful. Look at those two books I mentioned. I mean, Watchmen, the only way for superheroes to save the world is to terrify it into uniting against an imaginary threat.
Yes.
Miracle Man, the only way to save the world is to turn everyone into superhumans.
Yes.
Because that's the only way you can kind of wipe out that jealousy that occurs in the kind of hierarchical way we live our lives. But those are the answers a writer of Alan's caliber and intelligence are going to come to.
Well, and also I want to apologize identifying you just as a British writer. You're a Scottish writer. I think
I'm actually from Northern Ireland.
See, shame, man, I suck.
I
was
know.
to say, Grand Mark would have punched me in the mouth at this point.
I know that many Americans think that there is this sort of fierce, angry rivalry between the different nations that make up the UK. There is for some people. I don't give a shit.
Okay, good.
So, and apart from anything else, Northern Ireland is British, so.
Okay, cool. All right, good deal. All right, excellent, because I never want to offend, people that, again.
No. I don't care.
Well, regardless, as we wrap up, incredible body of work. I'm so glad that we are at an era where there is more acceptance for you both taking a piss out of things, your military comics. We didn't mention Jimmy's Bastards from Aftershock, another great series. You're getting back to that, right?
Yeah, new one in August.
There you go. So I hope everyone enjoyed this conversation. I hope you'll come back to Word Balloon and then do a new talk about that as well.
Happily.
Absolutely. Garth Ennis, everybody. Seriously.
Cheers. Thank you.
And Joe Rybandt.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Maisie Richardson-Sellers, and you are watching Fandom Spotlight. Be a legend and hit that like button, and most importantly, have fun and follow your fandom.